Excerpt from Spirit of the Herd. In this excerpt, published in 1914, author and professor Dallas Lore Sharp describes a summer cattle roundup in Oregon. The heat and dust had been relentless for 3 days. The cowboys were exhausted, and the cattle were restless. The ranch boss, Wade, had led the drive to a watering place, only to find it empty. Okay, these introductions are always really good. They're must-reads part of the passage. They'll give you a good sense of the scene setting of the main idea. So now we kind of know what's going on. All right, let's learn more about Wade, the ranch boss. Along the wagon had come the fresh horses, one of them being Peroxide Jim, a supple, powerful, clean-limbed buckskin horse. I think that had as fine, intelligent, and animal face as any creature I ever saw. Wade had been saving this horse for emergency work. And why should he not have been saved for just such a need as this? Are there not superior horses as well as a superior men, a Peroxide Jim, to complement a Wade? The horse knew the cattle business and knew his rider perfectly. And though there was nothing like sentiment about the boss of the P Ranch riders, his faith in Peroxide Jim was complete. Okay, so what are we seeing in the first two paragraphs? First, the paragraphs are shorter, again, not as small as 1 or 2 sentences as we see in some passages, but definitely on the short side. So we might have to piece together a few paragraphs as they put them to get a full sort of paragraph idea. Okay, paragraphs 1 and 2 are introducing the horse, Peroxide Jim, and Wade, the ranch boss. And the horse is an excellent horse. It knows the cattle business, and Wade has faith in the horse. The desert where the herd was camped was one of the highest of a series of tablelands or benches. It lay level as a floor. But now the herd was halted within a mile of the rim rock on the east, where there was a perpendicular fall of about 300 feet. In the taut silence of this stirless desert night, with the tension of the herd at the snapping point, any quick, unwanted sight or sound would stampede them. The sneezing of a horse, the flare of a match. And so, as he rode, Wade began to sing. The rider ahead of him took up the air and passed it on till the stepping stir of the hooves rose the faint voices of the men. It was not to soothe their savage breasts. It was to prevent the shock of any sudden startling noise. So they sang and rode, and the night wore on at 1 o'clock, when Wade, up on the rim rock, felt a cool breeze fan on his face and caught a breath of fresh, moist wind with a taste of water in it. Okay, so up to this point, we've been introduced to Peroxide Jim the horse and Wade. We're shown they're in the cattle business, and they're actually herding cattle up on a high series of tablelands where they're within just a few hundred feet of basically a cliff, a fall off, and things are taut there with full of tension. They're at a snapping point, according to the words used in paragraph 4. Any sound would cause them to stampede. So remember from the beginning, he's trying to get them into water. They haven't had water in days. And so, as a result, he began to sing, not to soothe their savage breaths, but to prevent any shock of a sudden startling noise. So, as a result, they sang and rode. But then Wade felt a cool, warm, moist breeze on his face. Something's going to happen here. We can kind of tell the tension's building up. Okay, so we've got sort of a scene setting, and the tension is thick in this scene setting. Let's keep going. He checked his horse instantly, listening as the wind swept him over the cattle. So him here is Wade, and he's checking Peroxide Jim. But, contrasting transition, they must have already smelled it. So they would probably be the cattle here, for they had ceased their milling, the whole herd standing motionless. Then they started on again, and with a rumbling now from their hoarse throats that tightened Wade's grip on the reins. The sound seemed to come out of the earth, a low, rumbling mumble, as dark as the night and as wide as the plain, a thick and inarticulate bellow that stood every rider stiff in his stirrups. Okay, so something's changing. The cattle also sense something's about to happen. Then, notice we're progressing chronologically in this story. The breeze caught the dust, carried it back from the gray-coated ghostly shapes, and Wade saw that the animals were still moving in a circle. He must keep them going. Across the black sky flashed a vivid streak of lightning. There was a snort from the steers, a quick clap of horns and hooves far from the herd, a tremor of the plain, a roar, a surging mass, and Wade was riding the flank in a wild stampede. So what had happened? There was a streak of lightning. A storm had come, and the herd stampeded. The noise, the light, it caused the herds to stampede. Before him, behind him, beside him, pressing hard upon his horse, galloped the frenzied steers, and beyond them a multitude borne on and bearing him on by the heave of the galloping herd. Okay, so they tried to avoid a noise by singing, keeping things calm, keeping the herd moving in a circle, but then a flash of lightning, and everything broke into mayhem. The herd started stampeding. Let's keep going. Wade was riding for his life. He knew it. His horse knew it. That's interesting. How would his horse know that? He was riding to turn the herd too. So he here is probably the horse, Peroxide Jim. Back from the rim, as the horse also knew, the cattle were after water, water mad, ready to go over the precipice to get it, carrying horse and rider with them. Wade was the only rider between the herd and the rim. It was black as death. Wade's caught in between the cattle and the rim. He could get pushed off. He could see nothing in the sage, could scarcely discern the pounding, panting shadows at his side. He knew that he was going to be borne toward the rim. How fast he could not tell, but he knew by the swish of the brush against his tapaderos and the plunging of the horse that the ground was stonier, that they were nearing the rocks. To outrun the herd was his only chance for life. If he could come up with the leaders, he might not only escape, but, transitioning, he even might stand a chance of heading them off upon the plain and saving the herd. There were cattle still ahead of him. How many? What part of them all? He could not make out in the dark. But, contrasting again, the horse knew. The reins hung in his neck, where his rider had dropped them. So Wade had dropped the reins for Peroxide Jim the horse. As yelling and firing over the wild herd, he had given this horse the race to win. So the horse was now in control. They were riding the rim. Close on their left bore down the flank of the herd, and on their right, under their very feet, was a precipice, so close that they felt its blackness, its 300 feet of fall. Then, chronologically again, Wade found himself racing neck and neck with a big white steer, which the horse, with marvelous instinct, seemed to pick out from a bunch and cling to it, forcing him gradually ahead till, cutting him free of the bunch entirely, he bore him off into the swishing sage. The steers, coming on close behind, followed their leader. That would be the white horse or the white steer. And in after him swung the others. The tide was turning from the rim. More and more were veering, and within a short time the whole herd, bearing off from the cliffs, was pounding over the open plains. So they had been saved. Whose race was it? It was Peroxide Jim's, according to Wade. Flash of the lightning, the horse had taken the bit, had covered an indescribably perilous path at top speed, had outrun the herd, and turned it from the edge of the rim rock, without a false step or a tremor of fear. So what happened? They were caught between the herd, but the horse took over. Instinctively, the horse knew he had to outrun the herd. And we see that in 12 and 13, we turn to the idea that the horse was running the show. It was not being controlled by Wade. It was trying to outrun that first steer. And it did. And it turned it away and turned the whole herd away as a result from the cliff and basically saved the day. And at the end, it tells us to summarize, whose race was it? Well, it was the horse's. Okay, so this is a literary excerpt. It's a story written by a third person. We're thrown into the middle of a scene, introduced to characters, a horse and his rider, the sort of ranching boss. And they were in a perilous situation up high on the cliffs. It was at first very tense. And then there was a streak of lightning that caused the herd to snap and race off, and at which point everybody, well, certainly Wade and the horse, their life was in danger. They're caught between the herd and the cliff, and they had to outrun the herd. The horse took over and instinctively steered the head steer off back into the plains, and the whole herd followed and saved the day. So attitude here, very positive toward the horse. I think we're ready to answer the questions. I have an idea of the main idea, why we care, what the progression of ideas of the story is, and kind of who's telling this story. So let's answer questions.